In part 3 we discussed collecting search terms, the basics of collecting search terms. There is, however, more to collecting search terms, more advanced options. If you collect search terms from the mesh database, it's important to look at narrower terms, terms in the tree below the mesh term that you are interested in. The mesh is not a static database, but it changes over time and new mesh terms are added. With previous indexing, you can see how terms were indexed, how articles were indexed before the mesh term was added. See also will give you some guidance on related mesh terms that you could consider in your search. If you look at the mesh term colorectal neoplasms, you will see that for entry terms there's only colorectal neoplasm, colorectal carcinoma, colorectal cancer, colorectal tumor. If you look at the tree of this mesh term, you will see that if you search for colorectal neoplasms, this would include a search for the mesh term colonic neoplasm, rectal neoplasm, anus neoplasm, etc. However, this does not mean that when you search for colorectal neoplasm, it also searches for colonic neoplasm in title and abstract, or rectal neoplasm in title abstract. Therefore, it's important, if you want to do a systematic review, that you should include the term colonic neoplasm, colon neoplasm, colon cancer, colon tumor, rectal cancer, rectal tumor, rectal carcinoma, anus cancer, anal cancer, anal carcinoma, etc. in your search as if it were an entry term. You will search these terms in title and abstract of your article. Mesh terms change, and if you were to search for atherosclerotic plaque, you'll see that this mesh term is introduced in 2011. That means, searching with this mesh term, you will not find articles before 2011. How were these articles indexed before 2011? It says here with previous indexing, atherosclerosis/pathology. Therefore, if you want to include articles from before 2010, it is important that you include atherosclerosis/pathology in your search. In some mesh terms, you can see related mesh terms. For example, the mesh term pregnancy. There is a list of see also. And one of these terms is pregnant women. These terms are not found in the tree of pregnancy, so searching for pregnancy does not mean you automatically search for one of these terms. But if you're interested in pregnancy, always consider to include the term pregnant women in your search as well. The see also should be included as a mesh term. This is a separate mesh term, so you need to add mesh between square brackets behind the search. Some things you should consider for yourself. Spelling differences between the British and American spelling, such as pediatric with an E or AE, should be written down both in your Word document. Also consider the use of abbreviations. Sometimes abbreviations consist of partial abbreviations. Instead of using hip osteoarthritis in the article in the abstract, the author might choose to use hip OA. Also think of opposites. If you're interested in mortality, you will be probably interested in survival as well. Let's bring all of this into practice. If we want to find terms for kidney dialysis, we search the mesh database we find a mesh term, renal dialysis. That is something we can write down. We scroll down to the entry terms. We see renal dialysis, hemodialysis, extracorporeal dialysis. These can be used. You scroll further down, you see previous indexing. Dialysis might be a bit too broad, but artificial kidney can be relevant. That is present with C also as well. If you click at artificial kidneys, you will not only find the mesh term artificial kidney, but also entry terms, artificial kidney, blood dialyzer, hemodialyzer, etc., etc. Going back to our search term renal dialysis, you will find there is narrower terms under renal dialysis. Hemodiafiltration could be added as a free text term. Peritoneal dialysis can be added. These narrower terms also have entry terms. If you click hemodiafiltration, you will find bioacetate-free biofiltration. If you click continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, you will see there is CAPD. It is also wise to look one step above the mesh term that you're interested in. Might renal replacement therapy be a relevant term that we could consider? Let's click on that. Renal replacement therapy might be relevant. They have entry terms, renal replacement, kidney replacement. Renal replacement will include each of these terms found below renal replacement therapy. We have found a long list of terms already. This is, however, not all. Some things you should consider for yourself. Spelling differences. Maybe we can combine the too broad term dialysis with a term that makes it more specific. Dialysis combined with kidney as a mesh term. Also, never forget that the mesh terms are not to be complete. They should not replace your own terms. You should always consider your own terms. The term that we started with, that is not in the list yet, is kidney dialysis. Other things you might encounter include subheadings, pharmacological action, supplementary concepts, and publication type, which you recognize by the square brackets behind the mesh term. If in your mesh results you see terms like this, vitamins with pharmacological action in square brackets behind it, or prevention and control with subheading in square brackets behind it, just copy this term as if it were a normal mesh term into your Word document and treat it as if it is a normal mesh term. If you cannot find a good mesh term available, there are several ways what you can do. You can try to split one element into multiple other elements and search separately for these separate elements. You could also try to find several specific mesh terms for broad topics. For instance, if you would be interested in cardiovascular events and cannot find a mesh term for cardiovascular events, you can search for heart ischemia instead. Or you can try a tool, PubReminder. PubReminder is a tool developed by the AMC in Amsterdam. You can easily find it in Google or use the link With PubReminder, you can do a search for a term, postpartum psychosis, for example, and see the mesh terms with which these articles are indexed, where you can find psychotic disorders and puerperal disorders, which would be a good translation of postpartum psychosis into mesh terms. If you did not find any good mesh term, you can always start with your own terms and optimize later. I now invite you to do an exercise. Please choose a clear and focused research question for your own. Create a list of the elements. Decide which elements to use. And for each important element, have a maximum of 4 elements and do not use more than 4 terms per element. Create a list of search terms for the synonyms for that element. Include mesh terms, entry terms, and narrow terms. This list will then be used to create a search strategy.